Dr. Jha, on the funding piece of things in terms of moving forward, you said a couple months ago to one of my colleagues that they were going to enter the fall and winter months with PPE in particular depleted and inadequate going into those months. Is that come to fruition? Is there an inadequate stockpile of PPE? And can you kind of walk through the triage operation on the funding side if more does not come your way?
Yeah, so we mentioned there were two areas where we were not going to have the stockpiles that we wanted to have going into the winter, PPE and testing, both essential parts of a COVID response. But when Congress fails to do its job, we have to make some extremely difficult choices. We made the choice, we wanted to make sure we had enough vaccines for Americans. We wanted to make sure we had enough treatments for Americans. And that necessarily meant that we went into this winter without adequate stockpiles of either PPE or tests. That remains true today. And, you know, the last point I will make about this is that, in my mind, it's unacceptable that Congress is forcing us to make these choices for the American people. The American people deserve a COVID response that doesn't trade off between tests and PPE on one hand and treatments and vaccines on the other. They deserve a COVID response that allows us to have all of those things. And unfortunately, that is not where Congress has landed on this.
The president today talked about those who are immunocompromised and some of the vaccines may not be able to protect them. Earlier in the pandemic, there was more of an approach, it seemed, for the collective to try to protect the immunocompromised. In his comments today, he said, if you are in that category, check with your physician, see how you can protect yourself. Has there been a shift in how people who have special requirements medically should be viewed in this? Is it the collective responsibility to protect them when we were doing masking and things like that and other steps? Or is it really now is the burden on the person who has those vulnerabilities?
Yeah, so I would say as a society, as a caring society, we care about all Americans, particularly the most vulnerable Americans. So it remains, I think, a collective responsibility for all of us to care about our fellow Americans who are immunocompromised. And by the way, immunocompromised feels like this kind of vague term. What is an immunocompromised person? These are people who have cancer, who are undergoing cancer chemotherapy. These are people who've had transplants. These are people who are on medicines for autoimmune diseases. So these are our neighbors. These are us, right? These are fellow Americans. What the president was highlighting was that with some of the new subvariants that are emerging, some of the main tools we've had to protect the immunocompromised, like Evusheld, may not work moving forward. That's a huge challenge. And again, lack of congressional funding has meant that it's been difficult for us to replenish our medicine cabinet. You know, we had hoped that over time, as the pandemic went along, as our fight against this virus went along, that we would be expanding our medicine cabinet. Because of lack of congressional funding, that medicine cabinet has actually shrunk. And that does put vulnerable people at risk.